Welcome back to the Whole Bible series. This week we are in the book of Leviticus. So what is Leviticus? As is the form in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the first three words, or the first phrase, is what is rendered in the Hebrew. I'm not going to try to pronounce it here, but it means, and Yahweh called. And so in the Tanakh, the book is called, and Yahweh called, or and he called, because they don't use the name of Yahweh. When that was changed, translated into the Septuagint, it was changed to Leviticon, which means pertaining to the Levites. And in English, the translation then is Leviticus. Leviticus is the third book of the Bible. Both Hebrew and Christian tradition hold that Moses is the one who wrote Leviticus while they were wandering in the wilderness. If you want more information on this, please see episode 2. And so Leviticus, we're going to start here with the first section, which is entitled Approaching Yahweh. So just to cover where we left off last time in Exodus 40, the tabernacle had been set up in accordance to what God had wanted, what his prescribed method was. And once that was done, he then dwelt on the tabernacle in the form of a cloud. And so God is now indwelling the tabernacle within the midst of the Israelites at Mount Sinai. And so we come to Leviticus chapters 1 through 10. And here in Leviticus, it's pertaining to the Levites, as we discussed. And everything in this book is going to pertain to the tabernacle and to the behavior of the Israelites in relation to God's presence, which is dwelling now among them. And so here in the beginning of the book, we have instructions for different offerings. And so there was offerings that could be given to God, and the different offerings were a burnt offering, which would be a male animal without blemish, one of these animals specified here, a bull or sheep or goat or dove or pigeon, a dove or a pigeon. This is all depending on the wealth of the individual bringing the sacrifice. And so you would drain the lifeblood, and 100% of that would be burnt, and it was a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So this is an offering of thanksgiving. Same thing with the grain offering. The grain offering is an offering of thanksgiving, and this would be given along with oil and frankincense to the priest, who would then burn a portion of it, but the grain offering, the remnants of that offering would be left for the priests to eat. That was their sustenance. There's also offerings of communion, which is a peace offering, where a giver would bring any herd animal without blemish, and they would burn the fat portions to the Lord as a pleasing aroma, and then they would share the meat with the priest and with God, then smelling the burning fat portions. And so it was an offering of communion. It was spending time with God and with the priest. And then there was offerings for impurity, for both sin and guilt. And these things are mostly for unintentional sin, but there is some intentional sin that is covered under the guilt offering. And this is where the sinful party would bring a sacrificial animal, depending on what the sin was, and bring that to the priest, and it would be sacrificed to atone for their sin. And we're going to talk more about atonement here in just a little bit. But basically what we need to know is that would cover their sin. It would decontaminate them so that they could still dwell in God's presence. Just a note over here, that many intentional sins that there were no offerings for at all. And if one of these intentional sins was committed, then the party would either be excluded from the community or put to death. And so God takes sin very seriously, and that is seen in his law that he's giving to the Hebrews here and in what he demands for sin and guilt offerings. We then have instructions for the priest. So here's a few of them: that fire must burn on the altar continually, that ashes of burnt offerings, once they're done burning, that they must be carried outside the camp. All males in the line of Aaron, who would then be in the priestly class, would have access to priestly portions, both bread and meat. But those bread and meat must be eaten in the court of the holy place. So out here, outside of the tabernacle, but within the court, that's where those portions must be eaten. There's also instructions as to Aaron's anointing. God talks about the uncleanness of priests in God's presence, that it's completely prohibited, that they can't be unclean at all, which covers not only sinful things, but maybe coming into contact with a dead body and the like. Those are things that could make one unclean. More on that later. And there was also a prohibition of eating fat and the blood. This is mostly because eating the fat was God's portion. God's portion was the fat. And so they could somehow or sometimes use fat for oil and that kind of things, but they couldn't eat the fat because that was God's portion. And when it comes to eating blood, we'll have again more on this in a little bit, but it comes down to that blood signifies life, and God takes life very seriously, and life is precious to him. And since blood signifies life, one could not eat of it. There's a little quote here to the left. It says, in comparison with the known sacrificial rituals of other ancient cultures, the Israelite system was relatively simple and straightforward. So if you've read through the book, you've noticed that there's a lot of detail. But in comparison to other cultures around Israel, this is actually very simple and straightforward. And so God is setting his people aside from the other nations. He's making them distinct from the other nations by these rules. Later on, we see the consecration of Aaron and his sons. So in front of the people, Moses washes and decontaminates Aaron and his sons, and Moses anoints the priests and the tabernacle. So chapter 8, we'll read here from verse 31. And Moses said to Aaron and his sons, boil the flesh at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and there eat it in the bread that is in the basket of ordination offerings, as I commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons shall eat it. And what remains of the flesh and the bread you shall burn up with fire, and you shall not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days, until the days of your ordination are completed, for it will take 7 days to ordain you. As has been done today, the Lord has commanded to be done to make an atonement for you. At the entrance of the tent of meeting you shall remain day and night for 7 days, performing what the Lord has charged, so that you do not die, for so I have been commanded. And Aaron and his sons did all things that the Lord commanded him by Moses. So here we see that the ordination process here for the priests, actually it takes 7 days, but seeing how seriously God takes it, that they cannot stray from his commandment or they will die. So it's very important to note that. Chapter 9. On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel, and he said to Aaron, take for yourself a bull calf for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. And say to the people of Israel, take a male goat for your sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both a year without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for peace offerings to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil, for today the Lord will appear to you. And they brought what Moses commanded in front of the tent of meeting. And all the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, this is the thing that the Lord commanded you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you. Then Moses said to Aaron, draw near to the altar and offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people. And bring the offering of the people and make atonement for them, as the Lord has commanded. So Aaron goes on and offers an atonement first for himself and then for the people of Israel. Verse 22. Then Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them, and he came down from the offering of the sin offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings. And Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting, and when they had blessed the people, the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the pieces of fat on the altar. And when the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. So now we're stepping back a little bit. We're going back to the end of Exodus where the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. This is that moment. So we kind of took a step back and talked about how that process went of the priests being anointed and all that kind of stuff. And this is the moment where God comes down. So you'll see in the Pentateuch that it's a little scattered. The story scatters a little bit. There's things that we kind of need to know this week that we won't learn until next week. And so I'll try to touch on some of that, but you'll notice throughout the Pentateuch that there's some of these points of information that are a little scattered and non-sequential. So up to the end of Exodus, everything's been fairly chronological. Now we're going to see that the story kind of jumps back and forth a little bit, and you have the writer of the story kind of filling in gaps. And so that's where we're at here. So now the Lord has come down on the tabernacle, and his glory has revealed itself in front of the people. Chapter 10. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, these are his oldest sons, each took a censer, which is like a thing to carry fire, and put fire in it and laid incense on it and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord has said. Among those who are near me, I will be sanctified, and before all the people, I will be glorified." And Aaron held his peace. So we see here that something strange has happened, but it really comes down to the fact that this was unauthorized, that God has been so detail-oriented about what he desires, what he commands in his worship, and Nadab and Abihu have gone against that. And so we can skip down here to the box where the highlight is. Unauthorized fire, actually the literal translation is strange fire, but it's unexplained. So we're not sure if they have an unsanctified source of fire, or if they could be attempting some kind of unauthorized ritual that God hasn't commanded. Or I think personally, the most likely is that they tried to enter the most holy place because they haven't had instruction on the most holy place yet. But they, again, went about it without getting God's command. And so they kind of did their own thing, and they paid the price for it. Continuing on, verse 8. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Drink no wine or strong drink, you or your sons with you, when you go into the tent of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, and you are to teach the people of Israel all the statutes that the Lord has spoken to them by Moses." So now Aaron is left with his two younger sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, to help him with the priestly duties. It's the three of them. And then it will be their male offspring from there. But the takeaway from this encounter in chapter 10 is really that the tabernacle, which is where God is dwelling, is sacred and must remain holy. And any deviation from his prescribed behavior or his commanded worship will not be tolerated. And so, unfortunately, they find out here the hard way how serious this is. But this is a learning point. Moving on to chapters 11 through 25. So this is talking about the community and living in Yahweh's presence. So we start off talking about cleanliness in the community, cleanliness. God demanded that the community be clean, and so he gave them laws about food, that they had clean animals that may be eaten, and there were unclean animals and insects that they were not allowed to eat. any contact with any dead food items causes uncleanness till evening. There was laws about personal cleanliness, things that made someone unclean. We talked a little earlier about some things that aren't sinful but can make you unclean. Some of those things were childbirth, menstruation, in that case, any contact with blood, skin disease or sores, and sexual organ discharge. All these things could cause someone to be unclean for a time. And because they were unclean, they were not allowed to be in God's personal space because they were unclean. And then God gives them processes for cleansing both lepers, people with skin diseases, and houses. I have a note here. Leviticus 11:44 says, "For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy." So God is demanding his community to be holy, to be clean. And when they are not clean or holy, then either recompense needs to be made for that, or they need to be cleansed before they can approach God. This is all part of living in Yahweh's presence. Then we come to the Day of Atonement. We're going to camp out here for a little while. This is probably the most important thing to understand in the book of Leviticus, because it's going to affect our theology as we get into the New Testament and understanding who Jesus is. So let's just read through here, and I'll point out some things along the way. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they drew near before the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil." Here he's talking about the most holy place where the ark sits. Before the mercy seat, that's another name for the ark, that is on the ark, so that he may not die. So he's telling Aaron not to come into the most holy place whenever he wants. God is going to prescribe a time for him to do so. Continue on. "For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat." So God's presence is now within the most holy place upon the ark. And later we find out that he considers the mercy seat, or the top of the ark, as his footstool. But continuing on, verse 3. "But in this way Aaron shall come into the holy place with a bull from the herd for a sin offering, and with a ram for a burnt offering. He shall put on the holy linen coat, and shall have the linen undergarment on his body. And he shall tie the linen sash around his waist, and wear the linen turban. All these are holy garments. He shall bathe his body in water, and then put them on. And he shall take from the congregation of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering for himself, and shall make atonement for himself and his house." So I'm going to pause there real quick and talk about atonement. You see, I have a note here on the left that talks about atonement. The word in Hebrew is kippur, and it really means to cover. So we can think of this as a decontamination offering, that the people are approaching God and they are unholy, they are dirty. And so this offering does not forgive their sin, but it covers them. And it so allows the blood of the sacrifice animal to cover their sin. And that's what atonement means. Continuing on here in verse 7. "Then he," talking about Aaron, "shall take the 2 goats and set them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron shall cast lots over the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel." We will talk about this in just a minute. I'm going to continue on for now. Verse 9. "And Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord, and use it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel." Excuse me. Verse 11. "Aaron shall present the bull as a sin offering for himself, and shall make atonement for himself and his house. He shall kill the bull as a sin offering for himself. And he shall take a censer full of coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of sweet incense beaten small, and he shall bring it inside the veil, and put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is over the testimony, and so he does not die. So previously in Exodus, we talked about the fact that Moses couldn't see Yahweh because he would die. And that's what's happening here. So God is calling Aaron to create a cloud of incense so that he may approach God and be in his presence without dying. And he shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the front of the mercy seat and on the east side. And in front of the mercy seat he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering that is for the people, and bring its blood inside the veil, and do with its blood as he did with the blood of the bull, sprinkling it over the mercy seat and in front of the mercy seat. Thus he shall make atonement for the holy place, because of the uncleanness of the people of Israel, and because of their transgressions, all their sins. And so he shall do for the tent of meeting, which dwells with them in the midst of their uncleanness. So here Aaron is decontaminating the space so that God will continue to dwell with them. He is atoning for them. This blood is covering both himself and the Israelites so that they are pure in God's presence. Verse 17. No one may be in the tent of meeting from the time he enters, talking about Aaron, to make atonement in the holy place, until he comes out and has made atonement for himself and for his house and for all the assembly of Israel. Then he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord and make atonement for it, and shall take some of the blood of the bull and some of the blood of the goat, and put it on the horns of the altar and all around. And he shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times, and cleanse it and consecrate it from the uncleanness of the people of Israel. And when he has made an end of atoning for the holy place and for the tent of meeting and the altar, he shall present the live goat. And Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat, and confess over it all the iniquities of the people of Israel, and all their transgressions, and all their sins. And he shall put them on the head of the goat, and send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man who is in readiness. The goat shall bear all the iniquities on itself to a remote area, and he shall let the goat go free in the wilderness. So what we see here is a symbolic gesture. Okay, so there are 2 goats presented for the people of Israel. One of these is sacrificed, and the blood is used to atone for those sins. But the other goat, the live goat, has the sins symbolically placed on its head and is kicked out of the camp. So they've taken the sins, therefore, out of the camp, which help them stay clean before God. And we'll talk about this more in just a minute, but that's what the symbology is. Verse 23. Then Aaron shall come into the tent of meeting and take off the linen garments that he had put on, and when he went into the holy place, and shall leave them there. And he shall bathe his body in water in a holy place, and put on his garments, and come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, to make atonement for himself and the people. And the fat of the sin offering he shall burn on the altar. And he who lets the goat go to Azazel shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. So the man who takes the goat to Azazel outside of the camp must therefore cleanse himself before he is allowed to come back into the camp. Verse 27. And the bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought to make atonement for the holy place, shall be carried outside the camp. Their skin and their flesh and their dung shall be burned up with fire. And he who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and afterwards he may come into the camp. And it shall be a statute to you forever, that in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict yourselves and shall do no work, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse you. You shall be clean before the Lord for all your sins. It is a Sabbath of solemn rest to you, and you shall afflict yourselves. It is a statute forever. And the priest who is anointed and consecrated as priest in his father's place shall make atonement, wearing the holy linen garments. He shall make atonement for the holy sanctuary, and he shall make atonement for the tent of meeting and for the altar. And he shall make atonement for the priests and for all the people of the assembly, talking about Israel. And this shall be a statute forever for you, that atonement may be made for the people of Israel once a year because of all their sins. And Aaron did as the Lord commanded Moses. So here we see not only is Aaron not allowed to approach the most holy place anytime he wants, but this only takes place once a year on a specific date where Aaron may, or the high priest later on, may approach God and make atonement for the people. All right, let's get back to Azazel. So the goat for Azazel, this has a lot built into it. And a lot of it isn't explained in the Bible. And so I'm going to read a portion from the Lexham Bible Dictionary here. Pseudepigraphic depictions of Azazel as a demon were prominent, and the wilderness was typically viewed as the abode of demons. Azazel is featured briefly in the pseudepigraphic work First Enoch at 8:1, 9:6, 10, 4-8, and 13, 1-3. He is described there as the demon who taught humans metalworking for the creation of weapons and adornment, and was cast into the desert as punishment. So let's go back now to the Watchers in Genesis 6. We talked about that in our first episode on Genesis. The Watchers were angels. They were sons of God who were supposed to be watching humankind, and many of them left their posts and came to earth to procreate with the women of man. And so Azazel is pictured as one of these, especially in the book of First Enoch. He is one of those who came down to procreate with women, and above and beyond their fornication with human women and creating an offspring that was only part human. These Watchers also were accused of teaching humans things that God didn't want them to know, such as items for war and warcraft and witchcraft and all these different things that could be used for evil. And so Azazel is one of these. Continuing on, relying on the use of the word goat in the construction of the name, it is possible that Azazel was imagined as a satyr-like demon roaming the desert, leading to the prohibition in Leviticus 17:7 against worshiping satyrs. In some extra-biblical text, Azazel appears to function possibly as an analog for Satan himself. In the Apocalypse of Abraham, this is another pseudepigraphical work outside of the Bible, Azazel appears as a competitor for God's glory. He's portrayed as the one who persuaded Adam and Eve to disobey God, who tried to lead Abraham astray, and who received soiled priestly garments. I also have another quote here from Occult World in the box. Azazel is a desert spirit worshipped by ancient Semites, that is, the people in the area of Israel, in the ancient Near East. Azazel, or Azael, is the archdemon of the Judean desert and king of the Syrian, goat-like spirits. In Akkadian lore, these are Semites who lived in what is now like the area of Syria and Canaan. Azazel is one of the Maskim, princes of hell. In 3rd Enoch, Azazel is one of the watchers who lust after the mortal women and descends from heaven to cohabit with them. He taught witchcraft and revealed eternal secrets. As punishment, he was bound by angels and imprisoned in the desert in a place called Dudael until Judgment Day. His name is sometimes used as a synonym for Satan. In the Apocalypse of Abraham, an apocalyptic text, Azazel appears as a 12-winged dragon with human hands and feet. So just a couple notes. First of all, we just talked about a dragon. We've talked about that in the past. Dragons or serpents symbolize chaos, just as does the sea. And so here, Azazel is portrayed as a 12-winged dragon or an agent of chaos. So the other note that I want to make is that all of this information comes from extra biblical text. This is not in the Bible, but it helps us to understand what the Bible writers are thinking, or what this whole goat for Azazel actually signifies. Because we don't have description of it, it helps us to know what may have been in the ancient Israelites' heads. This is well known at the time of Jesus and far before. And these texts are just as old as many of the texts in the Bible. And so this is likely what was in Moses' head when he was writing this. We'll move on. Continuing on, God then gives more laws for maintaining a pure community. He offers he gives laws against the unauthorized slaying of animals. Verse 7 here says, so they shall no more offer sacrifice to their, so they shall no more sacrifice their sacrifices to goat demons after whom they whore. So this is again referring to Azazel and his company. There's also a law against eating blood, which we talked about. Verse 11 says, for the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. So blood is the life force, and that is why it is so sacred to God. Moving on, there's no sexual relations with close relatives. There's laws for no sexual relations during menstruation. There's laws for no adultery, no sacrificing children to Molech, which is a competitive god in the area of Canaan. And it was common for people who worship Molech to sacrifice their babies. Continuing on, no sexual relations with the same sex. So homosexuality is forbidden. It's a sin. Continuing on, honor your father and mother, keep the Sabbath, do not make metal gods or idols, leave the edges of your field for the poor or sojourner. So when they reaped their plants, their crops, they would leave the edges. And so the people that were poor and the people that were traveling could have food. So this is about thoughtfulness and kindness, being truthful and dealing honestly with one another, fearing God, loving each other, and avoiding mediums and necromancers. And then there's plenty of other laws. But these, what I want you to notice is that God is requiring all these things to distinguish his people from the surrounding nations. Then he gets into punishments in chapter 20 and talks about child sacrifice. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel or the strangers who sojourn in Israel who gives any of his children to Molech shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. And so here we see that the punishment for taking an innocent life is death. God values life, and any taking of life that which God created is punishable by death. Continue on, mediums and necromancers. Verse 6, if a person turns to mediums or necromancers, whoring after them, I will set my face against this person and will cut him off from among his people. So anybody consulting a medium or necromancer will be kicked out of the community. Verse 27, a man or woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones, their blood shall be upon them. So this is another thing that the Watchers were talked about teaching to humans, was necromancy. And anybody who practiced this, which is a secret art that man is not supposed to know about, that is punishable by death. There are things that God designed humans to not know, and any going behind God's back to learn secrets of the divine that he hasn't given us is a sin. It's a blight against God, and it's punishable by death. Also, punishments for sexual immorality, depending on the severity and of what the sexual immorality is. It could be punishable by death. It could be punishable by expulsion from the community, or it could be punishable just that couple will be barren and not be able to conceive. In chapter 20, Israel's called to holiness. So God says in verse 22, you shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my rules and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. And you shall not walk in the customs of the nation that I am driving out before you, for they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. So again, we see God is trying to distinguish his people, to set them apart from the surrounding nations. He has called Abraham out of these nations, and now he's building something new. And so they are supposed to be different, set apart, which is what holy means. They're supposed to be holy and completely different than the people around them. Verse 24, but I have said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess, in land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore separate the clean beast from the unclean, and the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not make yourselves detestable by beast or by bird or by anything which on the ground crawls, which I have set apart for you to hold unclean. You shall be holy to me, for I am the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you shall be mine. God then gives laws for the priests, that no man with a blemish may approach God's altar or mercy seat. So this goes beyond just having a skin condition, but same with offerings, sacrifices to the Lord. A damaged person could not approach God's altar because they were not pure. And by that I mean that somebody who was lame or blind wasn't the way that God designed them to be. And so because they weren't completely pure, they could not approach God. And that doesn't mean that they couldn't serve God, but they just couldn't dwell in his presence because they were impure. All this gets fixed later on when Jesus comes, and we see that in the book of Revelation that we'll all be whole again. And so then we'll be able to dwell with God because we will be the way that he designed us to be. But coming back, continuing with the laws of the priests, that God gives regulations on who may eat the offerings, regulations on which offerings that the priests may accept, and also regulations on the timetable for eating the offerings. So again, God's very detailed on what he wants and what he prescribes for his worship. Then we get into feasts. God has designed feasts. And so he says here in chapter 23, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, these are the appointed feasts of the Lord that you shall proclaim as holy convocations. They are my appointed feasts. And so we have here the Sabbath, the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Booths. And these are feasts that must be kept every year. I again included the calendar here, the Hebrew calendar on the left, which includes all of these feasts and their months. So you see that these feasts, the Sabbath is every week, obviously, but these feasts, starting with the Passover, starts in the first month of Nisan and goes through the month of Tishri, where they are harvesting their fruits. And you'll see a couple other feasts that are noted on here, such as Purim. Those don't come till later, so we'll cover that when we get to the book of Esther. Then there's miscellaneous laws and punishments. So God says about lamps in chapter 24, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, command the people of Israel to bring you pure oil from beaten olives for the lamp, that the light may be kept burning regularly. So Aaron was supposed to keep these lamps burning all the time. And so the people were called to bring olive oil. There's information on the bread of the tabernacle, a law here. Verse 5, you shall take fine flour and bake 12 loaves from it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each loaf. Then verse 8, every Sabbath day Aaron shall arrange it before the Lord regularly. It is from the people of Israel as a covenant forever. There's also information on punishment. So punishment for blasphemy is death. And then again, we have some more information on punishment. Verse 17, whoever takes a human life shall surely be put to death. Again, God sees all life, whether born or unborn, as sacred. Any taking of that life calls for the punishment of death within the Hebrew community. Verse 18, whoever takes an animal's life shall make it good, life for life. If anyone injures his neighbor and he has done it, as he has done it, shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, whatever injury he has given a person shall be given to him. Let me move on to the next. Then we come to the Sabbath year and the Jubilee in chapter 25. First, the Sabbath year, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you, the land shall keep the Sabbath for the Lord. For 6 years you shall sow your field, and for 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its fruits. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. And so God is saying here that the land that I'm going to give you, that it needs to rest also. And so on the 7th year, your land will rest. Then we come to the year of the Jubilee. So this is the 50th year. We'll read in verse 8. You shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the time of the 7 weeks of years shall give you 49 years. Then you shall sound the loud trumpet on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement you shall sound the trumpet throughout all your land. And you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout its land and to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. Verse 23, the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners within or with me, and in all the country you possess, you shall allow a redemption of the land. So getting back to both the land and the people, God has declared that this land that he has set aside for Abraham is his. Not only has he created it, but he's going to give it over to them from their enemies. Additionally, the people are his. Not only did God create them, but he took them out of Egypt. And so he's claimed the people for himself. And then we'll see next week when we get to the book of Numbers that, and we also talked about it last week, that the firstborn man of every clan or of every family is his as well. So God has claimed these for his own. And he's saying here in the year of Jubilee that every 50 years, because the land is his, that this shall be given back to its inheritance. So when God gives over the land to the people that will inherit it, they will inherit it forever. And so whether they become poor and sell their land, or if they sell themselves into slavery over that period of time, on the 50th year, it will all be reset. And so at the time of the 50th year, people will get their land back, people will get their freedom back, and that's the way that God wants it, because he is the one who owns the people and who owns the land. Then we get into regarding the poor. So lending money, verse 35. If your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself with you, you shall support him as though he were a stranger and a sojourner, and he shall live with you. Take no interest from him or profit, but fear your God, and that your brother may live beside you. You shall not lend him your money at interest, nor give him your food at profit. So here God is setting a standard for his people. While they can lend money to people outside of the community at a profit, or move food to them at a profit, they're supposed to deal kindly with their brothers and to be fair. This goes on in verse 39. If your brother becomes poor beside you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him serve as a slave. He shall be with you as a hired worker and as a sojourner. He shall live with you until the year of Jubilee. Then he shall go out from you, he and his children with him, and go back to his own clan and return to the possession of his fathers. For they are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They will not be sold as slaves. And continue on the redeeming of a poor man. If a stranger or a sojourner with you becomes rich, and your brother beside you becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner with you, or to the member of a stranger's clan, then after he is sold, he may be redeemed. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his cousin may redeem him, or a close relative from his clan may redeem him. Or if he grows rich, he may redeem himself. He shall treat him as a hired worker year by year. He shall not rule ruthlessly over him in your sight. And if he is not redeemed by these means, then he and his children with him shall be released in the year of Jubilee. For it is to me that the people of Israel are servants. They are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So, for instance, if a man was to become poor and run out of resources, he may sell himself into indentured servitude to a fellow Hebrew, or even a sojourner who lives amongst the Hebrews. But if he or his family is able to redeem him to pay off whatever that debt is, then he may become free. But if he's not able to pay it, then in the year of the Jubilee, in the 50th year, him and his family will be set free, and they will go back to the land and get their property back. So this is really about God teaching them to deal with each other kindly. This also becomes interesting when it comes to property rights. Of course, the property ultimately is the Lord's, but he gives it to these families. And if a family has to sell their property, they're going to sell it for what it's worth. And so if there's only 10 years remaining in the Jubilee, then their property is going to be worth less than if there's 40 years remaining in the Jubilee, because at the end of that time, then they will get the property back. Let's go ahead and move on. So now we're going to move on to covenant blessings and curses in chapter 26. We're actually going to read through here because it's important for us to see. So this is the blessings for obedience. Verse 1, you shall not make idols for yourselves or erect an image or pillar, and you shall not set up a figured stone in the land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. If you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, then I will give you your rains in their season, and the land shall yield its increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last to the time of the grape harvest, and the grape harvest shall last to the time for sowing. And you shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land securely. I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will remove harmful beasts from the land, and the sword shall not go through your land. You shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall chase 10,000, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. I will turn to you and make you fruitful and multiply you and confirm my covenant with you. You shall eat old store long kept, and you shall clear out the old to make way for the new. I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. And I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. So we see here that the blessing for obeying God's commandments in the covenant is that he's going to dwell among them, and thereby they will be blessed. Verse 13, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their slaves. And I have broken the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. Then we come to the curses for disobedience. So if they don't follow God's commandment, what's going to happen? Verse 14, but if you will not listen to me and will not do all these commandments, if you spurn my statutes, and if your soul abhors my rules, so that you will not do all my commandments, but break my covenant, then I will do this to you. I will visit you with panic, with wasting disease and fever that will consume the eyes and make the heart ache. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be struck down before your enemies. Those who hate you shall rule over you, and you shall flee when none pursues you. And if in spite of this you will not listen to me, then I will discipline you again sevenfold for your sins. And I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heavens like iron and your earth like bronze. And your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield its increase, and the trees of the land shall not yield their fruit. And I will let loose the wild beasts against you, which shall bereave you of your children, and destroy your livestock, and make you few in number, so that your roads shall be deserted. And I will bring a sword upon you that shall execute vengeance for the covenant. And if you gather within your cities, I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy. You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. And I will destroy your high places and cut down your incense altars and cast your dead bodies upon the dead bodies of your idols. And my soul will abhor you. And I will lay your cities waste and will make your sanctuaries desolate. And I will not smell your pleasing aromas. And I myself will devastate the land so that your enemies who settle in it shall be appalled at it. And I will scatter you among the nations. I will unsheathe the sword after you, and your land shall be a desolation, and your cities shall be a waste. Then the land shall enjoy its Sabbath as long as it lies desolate, while you are in your enemy's land. Then the land shall rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest, the rest that it did not have on your Sabbaths when you were dwelling in it. And as for those who are left, I will send faintness into their hearts in their lands of the enemies. The sound of a driven leaf shall put them to flight, and they shall flee as one flees from the sword, and they shall fall when none pursues. They shall tumble over one another as if to escape a sword, though none pursues. And you shall have no power to stand before your enemies, and you shall perish among the nations. And the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And those of you who are left shall rot away in your enemies' lands because of their iniquity. And also because of the iniquity of their fathers, they shall rot away like them. So here, that's a pretty severe warning for anybody who wants to break God's covenant. God has made a covenant with them, and he's offered to bless them And this is both a warning and a prophecy of what will happen in the future. But he continues in verse 40, but if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers in their treachery that they committed against me, and also in walking contrary to me, so that I walked contrary to them and brought them to the land of their enemies, if their uncircumcised heart is humbled and they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob. I will remember my covenant with Isaac and my covenant with Abraham. And I will remember the land. But the land shall be abandoned by them and enjoy its Sabbath while it lies desolate without them. And they shall make amends for their iniquity, because they spurned my rules and their sore abhorred my statutes. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not spurn them, neither will I abhor them so as to destroy them utterly and break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. But I will, for their sake, remember the covenant of their forefathers, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt into the sight of nations, that I might be their God. I am Yahweh. And so God, even though they should fall away, that they should turn their back on God, he promises that when they remember and come asking for forgiveness, that he will remember the covenant and keep his promise. And this is going to be important, we'll see in the next several weeks. Moving on. And now to chapter 27. So chapter 27 deals with instruction for vows or oath-taking. It's pretty convoluted, and I don't think that there's a lot here that we need to glean from it today as we kind of look at the story of the Bible. And so what I want you to see here is that God takes vows or oath-taking very seriously. And chapter 27 is viewed pretty much as an appendix for the rest of the book of Leviticus. But I want to just make some notes here from the Lexham Bible Dictionary about vows. And this is what it says. Vows generally appear in the Old Testament narratives as conditional promises in the form of if-then. So if you will do this, then I will do that, indicating that a vow is only binding if God grants the desire stated in the plea. Excuse me. The conditional nature of the vow is not explicitly expressed in biblical poetry, but it may be inferred based on context. Men and women alike were permitted to make vows, but a young woman's father or a married woman's husband could annul her vow. Payment of vows could be a burnt offering, a monetary gift, the item or person requested of God, and then given back to him as fulfillment of the vow, or even praise and thanksgiving to God. While vow payments could be in the form of gifts, they could also be in the promises of abstinence, either temporary or lifelong, as seen in the Nazirite vow, which we will see next week. So what I want you to see more than anything is that God takes all of his laws very seriously. He has prescribed the way in which to be worshiped. He has prescribed the way in which his people are to act, speaking of the Hebrew people, and he will bless them and punish them accordingly. So next week we'll move on to the book of Numbers, and we'll continue in a bit of this topic and kind of moving on in the story of the Israelites wandering in the desert and getting closer to the promised land. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please leave them below. I thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week.